This is When I Grow Up with Paul Glazby.
Ben?
Paul.
Long time in the making.
Yeah.
I'm glad we managed to finally get together because your schedule usually doesn't permit. But I was a little bit of a background. I was lucky enough to meet you through our kids.
Yeah.
So my youngest and your youngest met at school, and they're basically like twins, aren't they?
Yeah, God, I think they're having a sleepover tonight, actually.
It's a sleepover tonight, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I left them earlier. So, and then, so we met a couple of times, and then we came over, we had that barbecue, and we had that chat. No, even before that. You remember we came to the barbecue at your place when you were at the other house? And yeah, just chatting for hours, and the books that I'd read that you'd read, and the
some massive
podcast,
similarities.
and I'm just like, yeah, this
works.
This is my people.
yeah, exactly.
So that was a good start. But yeah, I think you've got a pretty interesting story, the stuff you do now and the stuff you've done in the past. So
for sure.
It's
kind of you to say so, because I was just there, so I didn't really think about it.
That's exactly what I think about my story. But when you tell people, I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So it is certainly an interesting story. So take us back to, because you were in the police, weren't you, in the Northern Territory?
That's it. Up in the Territory. Yeah. So born and raised in a real remote part of Australia, Darwin, Northern Territory. Very small population. Grew up there for the first sort of 20 years or so, and just did the same thing that most people do, is just bumming around trying to make ends meet and figure it out, and
dodging crocodiles.
Dodging crocodiles and getting stung by jellyfish for my childhood. And there, joined the police in the Northern Territory. 20 years of age, I went through the college and celebrated my 21st birthday as a police officer. And look, I think. Looking back now in retrospect and with hindsight, you sort of think about being a policeman at that age, and it's insane to think that you would be given that much responsibility to go and step into people's lives and try and make decisions to support them or to help them or to prosecute them or to, whatever it might be. So anyway, that's where it started for me, with sort of where I've taken my professional career and where I am now. And it's always sort of been focused on justice and doing the right thing by community and service. So, ended up on the Gold Coast after, I think it was just shy of 12 years in the NT Police. Okay. And I'd done a few different things, but ended up in an industry now that's doing executive protection through Southeast Asia. So running one of the sort of industry-leading firms in Australia and the Asia-Pacific region. At last count, we've got a client net worth of about $400 billion in the top 5 of our Tier 1 clients, not including our corporates and our industrial clients that we look after. And that all came as a result of making that fateful decision to join the police as a 20-year-old. So, yeah, it's been a wild ride, I'll tell you that much. Yeah.
So you were never in the police on the Gold Coast, were you? It was always...
I left the NT... Oh, shit. I left the NT Police... Yeah, my bad. So 2017 is when I left the actual Northern Territory Police, which is a state police force or a territory police force in Australia. And I went into private enterprise, but about 2 and a bit years later, I ended up going to the federal law enforcement space, and I picked up a role with one of Australia's intelligence agencies doing covert surveillance work in sort of like a counterterrorism, money laundering, drug moving, tobacco, illegal tobacco stuff through Sydney. So
like a Jack Bauer.
It's certainly not a Jack Bauer.
That's what I'm imagining.
Probably, I don't know. So someone that likes to sit in cars and not actually get involved, more like.
Right, okay.
But no, so I went, and it's funny, I actually went from being in tactical policing, which is, where you're kicking in doors and blowing shit up and riding motorbikes every Friday afternoon or whenever you're doing a search and rescue, to disappearing into a covert role with an assumed identity, completely off the grid, but tracking some of the worst crooks in Australia. Domestically in that sort of CT / counter crime environment. So I never joined Queensland Police, but I did go into federal law enforcement. It was a small window because it was between sort of the stuff that I do now with the executive protection, but it was a massive eye opener into that IC, the intel community in Australia, because we get a fair share of really interesting crime come into Australia based on the fact that it's all got to come from overseas in the sense of, drug trafficking, money laundering, a lot of the organised crime is sort of imported over here as opposed to, we've got some pretty serious domestic stuff going on, but a lot of the really big criminal elements are sort of from overseas. Right. So, yeah. Yeah, nothing in sunny old Queensland from a law enforcement space, but have been here in an official capacity. I think it was G20 was my first trip over to Queensland as a police officer. Part of where I sort of take it back, when I joined the NT Police, it's general duties. I volunteered to go out bush. I started out there, pretty crazy times, a couple of really interesting things happened out there, but ended up in my career wanting to go into tactical policing, and part of that is that you become part of an interoperable capability around Australia under the Australian-New Zealand Counterterrorism Committee framework. And so when you've got your major international events where you've got world leaders coming in, there's not actually enough qualified police officers in the states and territories that host those events, so they have to bring in a cadre of other teams. And so I got to come in for G20 as a Northern Territory police officer working in Queensland, supporting I ended up looking after the president of the European Commission, who was only in town for a couple of days, but I think for the 3 days that I was officially rostered on duty for him, I had about 4 hours sleep because the guy was working just around the clock, and often we're awake an hour before the client or the principal, and we're asleep an hour after because of all the planning and preparation. They're wearing the kit, tooling up and tooling down, and one of those fateful nights working on this principle, I ended up having to go over to, I think it might have been the Hilton in Brisbane, and Vladimir Putin was staying there, and I wasn't on his detail, but because the president of the commission was mates with him from back in his time when he was in the KGB, and he was heavily involved in what was going on in Berlin, and this guy had spent some time in Berlin. We spent maybe 3 hours at the Hilton that night from about 2 o'clock in the morning, and they were doing caviar and champagne or whatever it is that the head guys speak about. And I can remember, like I was a decorated tactical police officer at the time, working in a dignitary protection environment. I was a lawfully authorised police officer carrying a firearm. Like I had all the authorised legislative power that I needed to be able to carry out my role and function. And I'd never felt so on edge in my career where there was absolutely no use of force going on, because there was this room full of Russian heavies and not a single word was spoken between myself and these Russians the entire time. I was like sat at the edge of a balcony balustrade while they were just parading around. And the reason I say parading is because when you've got foreign law enforcement operating in Australia, none of them are allowed to be tooled up, so no firearms. The Five Eyes nations, the UK and the US, had been given some allowances. So like the Beast and the counter-assault team for the US president, they were allowed to carry. The UK were allowed to carry. But the Russians had been instructed not to carry any firearms. And every single one of these heavies, and I'm talking every single one had a limp. They were all packing a brick on the back end of their suit jacket. They were all eyeing you off like you were the next meal for them to eat. It was genuinely intimidating. And I was there was one other Australian law enforcement officer who was down in the lobby, but I was the only Australian guy carrying and working on that level at the time. And there was nowhere else I could go because my principal was in the next room and I had to stay with him. But it was a real confronting moment for someone who, I fancied myself as a bit of a tough guy, right? Like I come from the territory, my first tactical job in the territory response group was going out culling crocodiles on the Mary River because a man had been taken by crocodiles. Like, I grew up in a tough environment. And as soon as I was placed in this space with these Russians, I was like, I'm probably a bit out of my depth here. I'm probably on the world stage. Crocodiles don't really mean much in comparison to like lethal Russians. So, it was an interesting time in the police. Yeah, Jesus, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you were you're doing the tactical police in
the Northern Territory.
Yeah. So what kind of things did that involve?
Well, Australia's got 8 police tactical groups. There's one in each state and territory, and then we've got a federal police force, and they've got one as well. Each one has their own barrier of entry to test and then be selected and join. The Northern Territory is by far the most dynamic space because they have the responsibility for counterterrorism response capabilities, for hostage rescue and siege management. They have the responsibility for dignitary protection, for visiting guests of government. They've got search and rescue, bomb response, and they did, only months before I joined, have the responsibility for the dive team for like police recovery underwater. And, to get into that space, there's only 30 police officers in the Northern Territory that can hold the designation in that team. There's 1,000-something police officers. Less than 1% of police officers that try out for it end up getting into it, and it would probably be similar around Australia. It's a very niche environment.
So it's like a SEAL team.
Well, I'd never go as brazen as to say that, but
for someone like me, it's the SEAL team.
It's the tip of the spear for policing.
Yeah.
When it comes down to, you might have a siege with a domestic situation going on. You can't have the SAS or 2 Commando or any of the SF elements from the military come in and deal with that. You have to have a police team deal with it. And in the policing world in Australia, it's a police tactical group, which is what the TRG was. But they also had the remit. So I'm also, a search and rescue mission controller and involved in the search and rescue stuff on motorbikes through the Northern Territory. It was a wild job, really wild. Like I remember being flown out. Well, I'll go back. That first job with the TRG, it was an evening shift. I just passed all my new boy courses. I was on the road. I was meant to be working 2 up with another guy, and this job rolls in through police communications that this guy's been taken by a crocodile, and it's about an hour and a half's drive from our home base, our HQ, to get out to the Mary River. We punch it out there. And the story we get when we get there is that this family's been on a houseboat cruising down the Mary River. They pulled up anchor for the night, and this old fella's been fishing for the day. He goes to get a bucket of water from the back of the boat to clean his fish and whatever he's doing. And as he leans over, this 5-meter man-eater just comes up and just crunches him. Like literally launches out of the water, grabs this man by the body, head down the stomach and gullet, takes him off the back of the boat, and then swims 2 Ks upstream with this man out of his mouth, legs and arms dangling as the guy dies. And our responsibility is I'd been in the job for 6 years at this point. I'd been to murders, fucking all sorts of stuff out bush. My exposure was fine. I wasn't freaked out by this, but the responsibility next is to then get out with the rangers and shoot every single crocodile within a square kilometre radius until we find the croc that's taken this man. And the only way to do that is to every croc you kill, you then drag onto the boat in croc-infested waters. So you're leaning over, grabbing crocs in croc-infested waters, dragging them onto the boat, slitting them up the guts, open their stomach, and then searching for body parts for people.
Oh, it's like in Jaws.
Legitimately, yeah. It's so we were doing that for days until we find the right croc.
Did you find it?
Yeah. Oh, so
right.
we find it, recover the body and all that sort of stuff. But that's the sort of environment that it's very inhospitable up there. Insofar as what we were sort of doing from a police perspective. We'd get called out to riots. I'd fly into remote locations like Nhulunbuy or Aliangula and or Port Keats, and we'd go in there with a team of 5 guys and a general purpose dog, and there'd be a massive riot going on with 400, 500 people in the streets just spearing each other, and nulla nullas, number 7 boomerangs, just absolutely chaotic. You know,
is that a number 7 boomerang?
Yeah, so it's probably worth googling. But a number 7 boomerang is probably the same size as a full-grown man's torso in the sense of length, and it's almost like a hardened wooden axe. You use it when you go on a war with another tribe, so that you know, between the Aboriginal tribes up there.
Made out of wood.
Made out of hardwood, yeah, and that
it's like a wooden sickle.
It is absolutely a wooden sickle. That's a great way to describe it, and they're great for braining people. They are literally.
Oh yeah, Jesus.
They are, yeah, that's exactly what they look like. Yeah, so you can use either end, right? These are not the boomerangs that come back.
Right.
these
you put it in someone's head and it stays there.
These are beaten sticks, and you know, we'd fly out to these communities when they're riding, and you know, we. TRG have got a nickname up there in some of the communities. They're called devil cops because you get out and you're it. Right. Ain't no one else coming to quell this riot. It's you. And if they don't calm down, well then ain't no one going to stop this fight. Right. So we would literally go out there and we would be the tip of the spear to resolve any conflict. And you'd be going door to door, cracking doors, bagging bad guys, letting the dog off the lead, just toweling people up.
I'm assuming you don't have a number 7 boomerang. What do you have?
Well, most of the time, yeah, there was a bit of that. There was, look, we'd always take a long gun. We'd have a couple of long guns. So we would run a CQB M4 short barrel platform with an adjustable stock platform for any sort of close quarter combat work through buildings when we thought there was a lethal threat. But for the most part, we'd be using like a Remington 870 beanbag converted shotgun. So we'd be beanbag rounding people, or we'd be using, we had like a pepper ball gun, which was pretty epic. Think paintball, but just add lead filings and pepper spray. So we'd be quelling people, you know, trying to resolve conflicts with that. But to put it in context, you go into some of these communities and you'd have people with spears spearing each other, or, you know, crossbows, shooting each other with crossbows down the street. So we were trying to utilize less than lethal options to resolve really, really hostile conflicts between warring factions that would be carrying out all sorts of, you know, retribution and payback on each other for.
And what's this like?
Weeks.
Different,
Yeah, usually just different tribes or family groups or clans. A lot of what happened in the Northern Territory, sort of through the 80s, 90s, and into the noughties, was a lot of the Indigenous groups that were used to having their own space on the land were all brought back into, you know, single communities. So you had better focused government services. And so the police had the responsibility then of, you know, trying to maintain peace and law and order between a lot of people that usually wouldn't be that confined. So, yeah, so TRG was pretty wild. It got me ready for some pretty crazy things to come. And, yeah, I sort of took that from 2012 all the way through to 2017, and yeah, then left to do private security work through Southeast Asia, which is much more respectable and a lot more low key.
Sounds it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then at some point you had a little dalliance with politics.
I did. So at the same time as I was running and gunning in TRG, my wife and I, Melinda, also ran a CrossFit affiliate.
Oh, sorry, I forgot about that.
Yeah. And that's where it sort of came from. Not CrossFit, but the political stuff came from business.
Yeah.
So we'd been involved in business in the Northern Territory for about 3 years. My wife had then, we'd been running the gym. My wife then started a cafe. It was like an organic and health food cafe aligned with sort of the CrossFit environment. And, you know, we went down that path, and I started to get the shits with, like, I am very much the person that would go out there and put my money where my mouth is, and not just throw stones like I'm in the glass house and, you know, hope that someone does something for me. Yep. I would expect if I've got a belief, then I should be able to follow that through. Yep. Stand for what you believe in, stand for something. And so with the business stuff, I started to see what was going on with politics, and I was more involved because I had a stake in the game. I was paying wages. I had taxes to pay, payroll, all that sort of stuff, supply. You know, anyone that's in business understands that when you start seeing taxpayer money get just flitted about on travel trips for politicians, it's pretty grating. And so I thought, well, here I am. I'm a decorated cop. You know, I've given a decade of service. I've hit the pinnacle insofar as policing for use of force, like I'd been in shootings, taserings, you know, all sorts of different use of force options. I'd been meritorious in that sense. I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't been convicted of anything. That sounds bad, but in the sense to say, I thought that I was doing a pretty good job as a cop. Maybe what the next thing for me was
tase people in the right way.
Yeah, correct. I wasn't tasering grannies, to say the least. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to give politics a crack. I've run a couple of successful businesses. They were doing pretty well. I stepped away from policing and I got involved in working for the chief minister at the time and contested an election, which was probably the most humbling experience I've ever been through, outside of, you know, having your kids come along and realising that life's so much bigger than just yourself. But, contested an election in 2016, lost, which is the humbling part. And then, sort of stuck around in politics, just sort of dabbling here and there, and became the treasurer for the party that I was representing at the time during the most recent federal election, and got pretty heavily involved in the fundraising side of things as well for the party. Massive eye-opener in regards to where money goes with politics and who pays for what and what it's all used for. And I think for politics, once it's in your blood, it's pretty hard for it to leave. I was hugely impressed with what I saw with one of the candidates that we had, which was Jacinta Price. She went for the Senate in the Northern Territory and was elected, and incredibly proud to see her elected because I truly believe in what she stands for. She comes from the bush in the Northern Territory. She's Aboriginal by birth. I know her mother was a minister of the Crown as well in the Northern Territory, and they absolutely have their hearts in the right place for the betterment of what's going on in Northern Australia for Aboriginal people and just people in general. So incredibly proud of my time there. I find it can be quite controversial with the work that I do because we do a lot of projects for ultra high net worth families, family offices, corporates, and there's a desire to sort of stay away from politics or not to be seen as to be aligned. But I think for me, it's a matter of pride in regards to actually having the courage to stand up for what I believe in. So although I don't push it in the business environment, I'm certainly very proud of what I did.
Nice.
Yeah.
So the business you've got now?
Yes.
So you set that up in...
So I'm a part of the business at the moment, Panoptic Solutions, working with Troy Clayton. Troy established the business in 2010.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, so Troy, being the managing director, he not too dissimilar a career. He didn't do the law enforcement side of things like I did, where I went down the dignitary protection, police tactical group stuff. He was from a military background. He was an instructor with the close personal protection teams for the Australian Defence Force. He ended up leaving when Iraq kicked off, the private stuff that was happening in Iraq, deployed over there and worked with a couple of the more renowned, well-regarded groups that were over on the ground there. Came back to Australia after years and years of surviving, which you talk to a lot of PMC or private military company veterans, guys that have served in Defence Force or military organisations and then went to the private space, and it was an incredibly volatile place over there back when it kicked off. So Troy came back, studied paramedicine as a result of seeing a lot of his mates get turned inside out, you know, EMPs or VBIDs or IEDs that were charged and placed on the road that just, you know, destroyed these.
We know what VBIDs are, don't we? Because we had Luke on. Luke was telling us.
Well, I mean, look.
Vehicle-borne...
improvised explosive device, yeah. Right. I mean, we saw some VBIDs over Christmas in the United States, right, with the Tesla truck being exploded.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. That's a VBID at home in the US of A. So, so he kicked off Panoptic Solutions. It was more around... the paramedicine mixed with the executive protection and the security stuff. He also went and did a course which is Ronin SA. So anyone that's sort of looking into this environment of executive protection, one of the most well-renowned in the world courses is Ronin SA, that is run out of South Africa, and it's a mix between sort of close quarter combat, close personal protection and paramedicine. And so Troy, taking that experience, taking the Bachelor's of Paramedicine that he did, and then the experience from Iraq and the close personal protection stuff, stood up Panoptic Solutions. And it is without doubt one of the longest running industry leading organisations in Southeast Asia for executive protection. So cycle back to 2015 when I'm still inside the police force. I was selected to go down to Victoria and take part in the Australian-New Zealand Counterterrorism Committee Skills Enhancement course for dignitary protection. And that was all about taking your dignitary protection skill set, which would be like, you know, your shoulder man or your advanced work or the security driver for the principal, whether or not it's the Prime Minister or the Governor General or Princess Harry or William, who both of those gentlemen visited the territory and I had the chance to look after. And then taking it to the next level of like strategic planning. So I took that skill set in 2015, left in 2017 and brought that to Panoptic Solutions. And so we've seen our business now grow from, you know, myself and Troy through to, I think we're at like 27, almost 28 full-time employees. We've got a number of contracts throughout Australia and the Asia Pacific. And we're just thoroughly enjoying being able to find a place to bring veterans who have got a very unique skill set. Certainly not like Liam Neeson in
I was just going to say
that. But like, you know, there's a lot of guys that leave the military or the police and they don't know where to go because what they have isn't really transferable. Like, I mean, I can't really go down to, you know, Eagle Street in Brisbane and start telling people about the last time I went to a riot and I was, you know, dealing with people with a beanbag shotgun. Yeah. It doesn't really cross over to the financial district. But protecting the people that work in that space does. And so we take what we do very seriously. We're very thankful for what we get to do professionally with like some of the best people I've ever worked with in my life now after policing. It's been, truly fantastic, a really pleasurable experience. Yeah.
And how often do things go tits up?
Ooh, I don't know if I'm allowed to say how often things go tits up because we're a professional organisation. But
no, but what I mean is that how many times would you need like...
Oh, here's a banger for you, Paul. This is the last time I can remember things going truly tits up whilst working in executive protection out of the .gov space. So in with a .com email address, working over in Papua New Guinea. It was APEC, and I can't remember if it was 2018 or 2019. I can't remember the year now, but the job had finished. APEC was done. All the meetings, the official meetings were done. The Chinese had left. Pence had left. Most of the delegations were leaving. But the Papua New Guinean authorities hadn't been paid. So corrections and I can't remember if it was the police. No, it must have been corrections and the police hadn't been paid properly by the Papua New Guinean government. And they decided to riot. And they went to Parliament House in Port Moresby and they kidnapped 3 ministers. And
who did? The police?
The police and corrections. Yes, correct. Yes, we're not in Australia anymore, folks. And so they kidnapped 3 ministers of the Crown for Papua New Guinea, and they demanded their payment. And it wasn't coming. So what they did was they started rioting and going to all the hotels and doing run-throughs on the hotels. So you can imagine the local law enforcement are now turned against private security and the establishments that are there to protect and host these visiting nations. I was held up on the cruise ship that had been seconded to act as a major hotel for the conference. And my off-sider had flown out that morning. And I was left there by myself with a team of 7 principals that I was looking after, protectees. With the intent that we were going to fly out the next morning, it was going to be all fine. And I can remember receiving this information of this rioting going on, thinking, I've got no firearms. My local team has disappeared because they've just been swallowed up into the chaos that is Port Moresby. I'm stuck at the top of this cruise ship. The gangplank is still out, and there is no armed security on the cruise ship because they've all gone home for the day. So I grab my principals, and I'm like, right, this is a no-shitter. We very seriously could be in a lot of trouble, and I've got nothing to protect you with because all of the tools of the trade that I would usually have are gone. We can go to the bridge and we can be close to the captain, and I can get in contact with the embassy and I can let the director of security over there know, because I knew there was a QRF team based on one of the Australian Navy vessels that was in the harbour. And QRF is Quick Reaction Force. My understanding was it was a 2 commando element that was based there. And so I said, we can go to the bridge because the bridge is the closest place to a fast rope. So when the QRF come to hopefully rescue us, we will be close to the guys with the big bang sticks. And so I secured my 7 guys up there behind the bridge, on the top deck by the pool that was next to where the bridge was. And I can remember very distinctly, even now, looking out the window as this old school 1970s lorry that you would expect in like a Rocky, Rambo movie came rumbling into the driveway where the gangplank was, and out hops these dudes carrying the most busted ass assortment of firearms in the most ragtag uniforms, and I was thinking, we are fucked. I'm about to be, like that movie Snatch? You like Dags? What, like proper fucked? I was like, we're about to be proper fucked here. We are that rabbit. The greyhound is going to get us, and we're going to get proper fucked. So I'm like, righto, lads.
And all your fantasies of like going out in a blaze of glory, like these fucking guys are going to get me.
Yeah, these guys. I got nothing. Like all the things that I thought I was, tough and cool, and all the things that I'd done in my tactical operating world, nothing. Because I'm a single operator with no firearms, no use of force options on a open and unlocked vessel that I can't create a stronghold on.
I'm not a professional, but that sounds like poor planning.
This was a moment where I absolutely regretted everything that I had chosen to do by not leaving that night on the last plane out of Port Moresby.
Well, just keeping a gun would have helped.
Keeping a gun would have been ideal, yeah. So, these are the things you sort of look back on and go, fuck, I can't believe I got myself in that
learning
position.
experience.
Learning experience. Anyway, turns out, thankfully, those guys were the military, and the military had stayed on side with the government, and they secured the location. Nothing ended up happening, but that was an absolute oh shit moment for me. Like a life and death. Oh, I don't know what I can do here. Someone's going to die, probably me. So that's probably the most recent sort of, which is thankfully most recent.
But what about like in your sort of, and again, you might not be able to answer this, but like, is there times where the principal, is that?
Yeah, we call him the principal,
says, oh, I'm glad you boys were here today. Like, how often is like what you're doing like
confrontational, risky?
Yeah, like evidently required. You know, like
look,
because it's one of those. It's a bit like an insurance policy. You guys are like insurance, aren't you? Like you have it and hope you never need it, and most of the times you don't need it.
Spot on. In fact, our whole business, the subtle side of executive protection, especially in the States, is around tax and insurance. So when you've got you've got a principal who's the CEO of a Fortune 500 or a major mining
like that guy that got his head blown off the other week.
Yeah, exactly. The CEO of United Healthcare, right? What happens to the share price when he gets assassinated? Ridiculous damage to the company, reputational harm. You've got everything that flows on from it. So there is actually an IRA ruling or a section of the legislation in the United States where you can have your executive protection detail deducted from your business expenses. Oh, right. And when you do that, you can also reduce your insurance premiums associated with, kidnap and ransom or, death to the principal, whatever it might be. So the entire industry in the United States, although it's built around running and gunning and being a tough guy and, wearing suits and ties and having the curly earwigs, it's actually just tax and insurance. Everything comes back to the tax man. So, to answer your question though, Paul, the last time that I would have had a principal that actually needed us present, the last time would have been 2023, and it was during a principal visit in January, and it wasn't even a lethal threat. A lot of what we do is reputational harm protection and the integrity of the privacy of the principal, and we had a really, really rough time on this task, protecting this principal from the paparazzi. And it just so happened that the principal had a new partner in town, a new romantic partner, a new romantic interest, and they didn't want anyone to know who that was. And the paparazzi were fiending for this person. They were absolutely frothing to get an image of the person that they were trying to identify within the group that were a part of the protectee or principal's travel party. And it just so happened that one of these very savvy paparazzi investigators, photographers, whatever you want to call them, had figured out an entry point to the principal's location that they were staying at, and it turned into me shirt fronting this guy right in front of the principal to stop them from being able to get their camera up and, take a photo of the principal. So
what's that term you just used?
Shirt fronting, like in footy, you grab old mate, a bit of a shirt front, bit of a, argy-bargy, or what do you call it? Maybe a Donnybrook. You ever heard of a Donnybrook? When you get into a Donnybrook?
I'm trying to think what we call it in England.
I think you guys call it a Liverpool kiss. You just sort them out with a quick headbutt. Yeah. No, look, there was no use of force, but it was certainly very physical in the space of like presence deployed. So,
you made him think twice.
Yeah, exactly. Reframing his interest is a good way to put it. Yeah. Getting him to think twice is a good way. Yeah. So yeah, like it does happen, but in Australia, we are very much a safety nation. In Papua New Guinea, another incident, we were doing a convoy drive. We had a principal in the vehicle. We'd been over there for about 7 days. We were taking the principal back to the airport. We were going to fly out that afternoon. Really, really smooth run. However, the day after, we do the exact same movement, and there's an armed hold-up right where we took the principal, like 24 hours beforehand. So the reality is that you may never need the detail that protects you as a principal, but by God, you want them there when you do need them. Remington said it best when he said, better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. And so we sort of try and apply that when we're talking to our clients about what is it we're providing them. It's not just a burly dude in a suit that's ready to nutribullet at someone and turn them inside out. It's the capacity to provide that planning and that awareness of the risks associated with their physical movement. Because a lot of the principals that we look after are so time and attention poor with what they're doing insofar as running an organisation or a not-for-profit or a foundation or whatever they're doing. They just don't have time to even think about the most simple things in regards to their movement from point A to point B.
But I guess as well, like just people in general, there'd be like, how can I put this? Like you would walk into a room different to what me or Matt would.
Oh, maybe not yourself. I mean, you've spent a lot of time in pubs and clubs, right? So
yeah.
You're always looking at the entries and exits. You're looking at who's a tosser, who looks like they've had too much to drink. You're paying attention to those risk factors.
I guess, yeah.
And I think most blokes, I think, who especially with fathers, are aware of risks, physical risks. And really, when you're looking after a principal, what you're doing is you're providing them the same level of care as you would your own kid, in the sense of what you're trying to take care of them for. You're protecting them from everything you can. Embarrassment, physical harm, carrying a spare shirt in case they spill their coffee because they don't want to get, smudged up by the paparazzi. So I think a lot of guys do that, but then the other part of who we are is I am very, very comfortable with the fact that I know my fight or flight reflex is to fight. And I've been in confrontations with edged weapons, with guns, with crossbows, spears, number 7 boomerangs. Crocodiles, yeah, legitimately. And not once have I turned and run, not once have I feared or frozen. I react with violence, and whether it's controlled or metered or specific, and that is a unique attribute that you need to know you've got the capability to express to truly provide this skill set or service to a person.
It's funny, like when you listen to Joe Rogan and he talks about when people say, "Oh yeah, well if it kicked off, I'd."
Yeah,
like,
it's a
I remember
one.
Knowing you for a few months. I'm like, if I ever got in a fight, I'd just lay down. Sometimes you just need to know when to give in.
Yeah. I think there's the real. I love Jordan Peterson. We're talking about books when we started. 12 rules. What is it? 12
rules for life.
12 rules for life, and then he's got the second one, the 12 rules of order or whatever it is. I can't remember it is. It's the follow-on, but I remember reading his book and then listening to a lot of what he said, and he talks about being dangerous, and you're not a dangerous person if you can't express violence but choose not to. You're not containing anything. You aren't a risk to anyone. You're just a lamb. And I think that's probably the way I sort of look at the executive protection environment is you need to know that what you've got is someone who's got controlled violence at all times, but they choose not to use it because they prefer to abide by the law. And Colonel Grossman talks about, I think it was him, the sheepdog. And it's, you know, like, you want to be able to blend into society. You and I can sit there at a barbecue, and you and I have, in fact, done that, where we've had a barbecue and we get on really, really well, and, you know, we're just really friendly people. And that's what you want to be able to do with this role. You want to be able to blend into any environment, but then should the need arise, you've got the capability to provide that use of force option. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, that's...
I mean, I've got some friends back in England that are, you know, hard nuts, but...
Yeah.
They don't blend in very well.
Yeah, well, I think that's the other part of it as well. Yeah,
that's like the, you know,
that's that image.
You don't really that can be an issue in itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I guess for me, I've never tried to be anything other than the responsibility of the work that I was doing at the time. Yeah.
Which is why you never got prosecuted.
Which is why I never got. Well, I did get taken to court by a certain outlaw motorcycle gang. Their sergeant at arms did try to prosecute me for a time that we arrested him, but thankfully all my actions were found to be lawful at the time. So, yeah.
When I did my personal training diploma, there was a guy, I can't remember his name. God, he was one of the
bikies.
No. Sorry, one of the instructors for the personal training.
Oh yeah,
course.
okay, yeah.
And but he'd been a cop, but he'd had to leave because something had happened, and then they'd said he'd used excessive force.
Oh, yeah.
And anyway, he'd written a book, and he was saying about how he'd gone to get this book published, but he kept getting knocked back. Oh. I can't remember what the name of the book was, but I said to him, it should be called Fair Cop, ? Fair Cop.
Oh, that's a banger.
And he contacted me about 2 years later, and he got it accepted.
What? Fair Cop?
Fair Cop.
Oh, wow, that's a banger. That's a really good title for a story that he would have to tell.
Yeah, but because he said he was, you know, he'd just done what needed to be done. But and all these sort of his cop mates had like turned against him or something. I can't remember. It's 20 years ago, so I can't really remember exactly. But yeah, I just remember to me it seemed obvious. I'm like, mate, it could be called A Fair Cop.
That's a great title. I'll have to look up the book.
Yeah, in fact, I never did. Like, I really should.
Yeah,
but God, what was his name? Anyway,
that is the sort of stuff you do have to that you're constantly thinking about, and from an executive protection standpoint, when you're looking after a principal, you are thinking about that front page of the paper the next day. You know, reputational harm goes both ways. If you go heavy-handed with someone who just wants to speak to the client, you know, like a great example is Messi's bodyguard. Like that, he is just the most professional, fantastic operator in the way that he interacts with the public. He looks after his principal. He provides a level of protection around this guy that is world class, because when he's got fans that are coming up, he's standing in the way or he's positioning himself appropriately, but he's not doing so in a way that makes them feel like they can't approach the principal, because the principal's, he's famous, right? Like so public interaction's a really big part of who he is. Yeah. So he wants to be able to interact with his fans. That's a huge part of, you know, his success and what he does, and the whole sporting scene behind, you know, football, soccer, whatever you call it. But at the same time, this guy's got to manage the expectations of, you know, protecting the principal, but also the fans that want to get in close and speak to their, you know, their superstar that they want to get behind. So, you know, he's doing a really great job of mitigating how much use of force he's providing in a situation where he's got to protect someone, but at the same time, he's also doing a really good job of protecting them while making it look very soft and, you know, particular in the way that he's doing it. So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting space, but...
what about the... I don't know whether you can... Hopefully you can give your opinion on it. So when they tried to shoot Trump, and they were all like faffing around, that bird couldn't get a gun in it, you know, like... You must have watched it. Even I watched it. I'm like, what are these guys doing?
Yeah,
or not doing?
That was a... look, I remember watching what happened with that and watching the replay, and I just wish it had looked better for some of those people that were present. You know, like, people train relentlessly to do, executive protection or dignitary protection, and the Secret Service are no different. To get into the president's detail is no small feat. However, he wasn't the president at the time, and so it's a different group of people that are working on a presidential candidate. There's a lot of conjecture around the planning and the fact that the shot was even able to be taken in the first place and the way that it happened.
Ridiculous, yeah.
Oh yeah, but sadly, what was recorded does not do that group of people, well, particularly that individual, trying to get their firearm away and holstered, much justice. Yeah. But then, if you are trained to use a firearm or you're carrying a firearm in the line of duty and you don't spend thousands and thousands and thousands of hours on that repetition of what you're doing with that firearm, I think you are probably derelict to a degree in what you are responsible for doing.
It's like when you first learn to drive, you look at the gear stick when you change it. But you don't do it any. We don't drive manuals anymore, but you don't look at the gear stick after the first.
No, because you know what you're doing,
and that's literally like what that looked like.
Yeah, that was a moment of we call it like your gross motor skill overwhelming and your fine, more dexterous motor skills disappearing. And you can see it in the major movements of the elbow and the fumbling of being able to get the firearm or the
having to look down.
Yeah, having to look down to be able to holster the firearm, and it just clearly indicates that this person was so overwhelmed with emotion or stimulus or whatever it was that they lost their capacity to do their fine motor skills, or they hadn't trained those fine motor skills
that's what I was just
enough.
Say. Exactly.
Yeah.
I remember a few days after seeing this guy. I don't know if he was like a Navy SEAL or he was like somewhat. He looked like an absolute badass. This guy, and he's like
basically looked like me, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just like I thought it was you at first.
Yeah. Just a ginger beard, big ears.
Accent was different.
I get it all the time. It's terrifying.
And this guy was breaking down. What? Yeah. And he's like, whatever he was, X. He said, "There's me and 20 of my mates. We'll look after you for free." And we will do the best. And I'm like, why does he not have these guys?
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, funnily enough, I just saw that the British SAS guy that was involved in the, I can't remember what they call him, but he's the guy that they sort of dubbed Obi-Wan Kenobi because he went into that siege situation in Africa by himself and basically killed all the terrorists, right? Like he's the SAS guy that went in there, one up. He was over there doing a training thing. I see that he's just been brought in to protect Trump. Right. So he is now going out and he's like finding the best operators out there to go and do this.
And the thing is, that's what I was thinking before, and you were saying about Messi, like most people are just going to want to come up and get, probably a bit too close for a photo. Whereas Donald Trump, people literally want to kill the guy, which is
twice now, right? Twice in the last year, they've been active attempts to try and kill him that have come to light. Because the other part of this is that there's so much work done by law enforcement agencies
to suppress it before it gets that far. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. You're dealing with mentally fixated persons or disturbed persons. G20 is a really good example. We didn't have hyper controversial figures coming to Australia for that. Like Trump wasn't a president; he wasn't even a candidate at that time. But the number of fixated persons or people suffering from mental illness that were dealt with by Queensland Police prior to that event was astronomical. And they're all the people that are the ones that will carry out an act against a world leader or someone that they are fixated on as the person. Yeah. It's a wild old place, but I guess this is it's an expanding industry, especially since we saw what happened to the CEO of the United Healthcare. So look, I never thought I'd be here growing up in the Northern Territory. I never thought, standing next to world leaders was not something.
I'm from Sheffield. I never thought I'd be here either.
Yeah, you're right. You just know, you don't know where you're going to end up. No. But, looking after Prince Harry when he came over to Australia to fly attack helicopters.
Oh, you know what, Tess, she would have loved an autograph when she hears this.
We're not on talking terms by any means, but, I grew up in the bush in the Territory. There was a time in my life where I was living in a house that didn't have walls. I grew up next to a...
they call that a roof.
we had a roof. We had a tin roof. We had no walls.
How does that work?
I literally, from the age of 6 or 7, I lived in a tin shed. Like, long story short, with the family, we ended up having to move out bush, like proper out bush into the bush and the territory. And like, I think back to that and, how I ended up where I am today doing what I'm doing from where I came from it just boggles the mind. But I guess that's life, right? Like that's the choices that you make along the way that take you from point A to point B, freakish.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's certainly. In fact, we were even talking yesterday. Some of the choices I've made that you go, why? But then I wouldn't be here now if it wasn't for.
Mate, that's one of the biggest things that I admire about you is the fact that you literally went from being, an A-list DJ in a scene that would have been gigantic in comparison to any scene over here in Australia, to like moving out to Australia, and now you're managing a business and a practice that's providing hope and futures for people with real estate options. Like it blows my mind what people are prepared to do if one, they're curious, so they don't have an intolerant attitude and they're prepared to ask questions and they're prepared to, investigate new options for themselves. And two, if they've got the bravery to just fuck off procrastination and take some serious action.
Yeah. Definitely pay off.
Wow. Yeah. How did you, or what was it? What was the catalyst that brought you to doing this? Because when we started speaking about it, I loved this idea. I think this
the
is
podcast.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I don't know. I just felt like it was something. I just wanted to spend more time with Matt. I met Matt, and I'm like, I need an excuse to spend more time with him. So he wouldn't hang around with me, so I had to
you had to pay him to hang around.
I had to get into be a podcast
I do the
producer.
same thing with friends these days too.
No, it's just something that I've been wanting to do it for a while, and I kept thinking about doing something real estate. Very real estate specific, but then I couldn't think of something that would be like entertaining enough because, I have listened to some real estate podcasts, and if you want to know something specific, if there's a particular topic, it can be good. But just for the general, I'm a real estate agent, so then I would have more of an interest in it than But from the public point of view, I thought, is it that it's kind of you could make it really interesting, but the stories that you'd tell would be pretty compromising. So I couldn't go down that.
Yeah, well,
route.
I know that story.
Exactly,
I know you can tell some compromising stories.
So I was thinking, is there a more entertaining route? And then the other thing was the amount of times I get people that say, "Oh, you're not like a normal agent. You're like like a normal guy.
You're not like a normal agent, mate. Like that's what I think is the most amazing thing is that you are genuinely this incredibly interesting person prior to doing this. And part of that is this as well. Again, it's the creative element behind it.
Yeah, I think that's the creative thing. I think when I had when I was DJing and then obviously the record label, and even when I had the gyms, because you're always like someone said to me about real estate a few years ago now, but they were like, "Oh, it must be really difficult, keeping people happy," and I'm like, "Not at all. Like even if you're doing a property that takes longer to sell than it should, you're looking after someone for 3 or 4 months, really, sort of focused looking after. When I had the gyms, I had members that had been members of the gym or the boot camp that I had before, or personal training clients before the gyms for like 10 years. Yeah. And the way I summed it up is, you've got, we were the most expensive gym in Sheffield, but the service that we offered justified that. It wasn't just a normal gym. It was like the group personal training sort of thing. Like the closest thing here would be F45.
Yeah,
but sure. What we did was certainly better than F45. Sorry, F45, but it was. Yeah. And
it's good to have pride. It's good to have belief in what you've done, mate.
Well, I went to F45 here, and I'm just like, there's 2 trainers there, and they're just talking to each other. Yeah. While people are doing exercises incorrectly, and I'm like, this is not.
Wasn't
right.
up to the standard that people would expect.
So so we were charging people a premium to telling them to not do the stuff they wanted to do and making them do stuff they didn't really want to do and then keep them engaged for, like I said, in some cases 10 years. Yeah. That is hard. Yeah. That's the real
especially when you're making a repetitive transaction week to week or month to month or whatever it is, and you're convincing someone that that's the thing that they want to do, right? Like, I'm not the greatest salesman, but I've certainly convinced people to get in the back of a paddy wagon when they didn't want to. However, I had certain tools at my disposal to convince them that this was a good idea. Yeah. And if it wasn't, I had a better thing for me to do that was worse for them to do. And so like those sales skills that I took from policing to convince people to do things, you know, like deprive themselves of their own liberty, getting in the back of the police car, I've come to realize that anyone that can make a transaction enjoyable for somebody else where, you know, like for instance, the real estate transaction where when you're paying someone for a house, but you enjoy the fact that you're going through that process, or perhaps you're paying someone to sell your house for you, but you enjoy that fact because they are a decent person, they do give a damn about you, they are interested in the outcome that benefits you, not just themselves. Like that's a really unique skill.
Well, I mean, just this morning, I made a sale this morning and ended up over $200,000 more than what we appraised it for.
Wow.
Or what the owner was expecting.
Well, vicariously, what is the feeling like that when you see the owner get that drop for them? Like that's got to be pretty special.
Oh, I mean, for me, that's what it's all about. I've mentioned that, you know, in previous episodes where it's like that is what real estate is all about for me. Is that you know, but the lady the lady that's bought it, or the family that have bought it, she's got some her daughter's going through some health issues which have all of a sudden happened, and every time I've spoken to this lady, she's been in the hospital. And she was saying that, you know, what's happened to their family has really made them think, right, because they've been wanting to get a holiday home on the beach for you know, years, and she's like, it's just made us realise life is short, let's just do it now.
Oh well.
But when I called her to tell her that she'd bought it, she started crying. She even called Michael, my business partner. She said, I need to speak to you, I want to tell your boss, you know, how amazing you've been. And then he rang me later, he's like, oh my God, she loves you. But you know, but I actually called this woman at one point as well, and I said, look, is this the right, because it's just about to have some work done on it. And the way that I'd interpreted her sort of story was that she wanted to get a place for her daughter to kind of recover in. That's what I thought she was getting it for. And I rang her and I just said, look, are you sure this is the right place for you to buy? I said, because they're about to start the works, and you know, if she's going to be recovering and there's going to be you know, drilling and banging and whatever. And she's like, no. She said, we just decided that we're going to get it now. We are going to use it as like a holiday home. But she's not going to be there all the time. And then she called me back and she's like, I've just realised what you were actually
trying to do. She said, what agent would think about that? And I said, well, I just understand what you're going through, and I don't want I don't want you to regret buying it. And she's like, oh my God, so that's obviously what's influenced her calling Michael. But that's what it's all about. And some deals you do, there's not a lot of emotion. Sure, sometimes
there's
transaction,
it's just
a transaction.
Exactly, But that when you do those ones, that's what it's all about.
Mate, I couldn't agree more, and I think it's a really noble thing what you do in the way that you do it as well.
There's not many people call real estate agents noble, Ben. Well, but I'll take it. Take
it, mate. Maybe I'm not calling real estate agents noble, but I'll certainly say the way that you conduct yourself, Paul, I think is a very noble way to do business, because I think you take that trusted advisor position where you're not just representing one person, you're actually representing interests so that they align. And that is something I can relate to from a police perspective, because one of the critical things that we do have to do prior to being the tip of the spear and, you know, carrying all the tools and being a Harry hard charger is you have to get people's interests to align whenever you go to their house and you try and get them to make a formal complaint and go to court and follow that through, or potentially you're trying to resolve a very heated domestic argument where perhaps there's two motivated parties that are trying to get, you know, one up over the other of them, but really what you're trying to get is the best outcome for everyone involved. That's what policing is, and sometimes it's unfortunately to the detriment of the offender, not their interest, it's the interest of those people around them, and that's where you're trying to align interests. But I really do think the way you approach what you do is definitely got the benefit of all of your creative background from, you know, like you said, nurturing relationships in the
I think that's been a big help.
All the way through to being a creative person that genuinely created some of the most incredible music that was cranking around the club scene, you know, back in the day.
Oh yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Ben. It's been great. You're the nicest badass I know.
Former badass. Actually,
you can still turn it on when you need to.
Yeah,
let's not sugarcoat it.
I was actually I was actually just in the US and I was catching up with a Canadian former badass, and you may want to cut this bit out, but he's wearing this shirt, Fags, Fags. Probably not politically correct anymore, but
cigarettes.
Yeah, no, former action guys.
Oh.
So, complete piss take on the whole, machoism of like that tough guy thing. But yeah, definitely formerly.
Well, Trump's in power. We can say that shit.
Yeah, exactly right. He's declared 2 sexes. He's been as divisive as anyone can get. I'm pretty safe.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we'll have you back on because I'm sure there's going to be some more stories. But yeah, if there's any oh shit moments, just write them down so you've got some material.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yeah, I appreciate it, mate.
See you next time. Cheers,
cool.
pal.
Cheers, Paul.
This is When I Grow Up with Paul Glazby.